what were you expecting, if anything, and what expectations have been met, not met, or what have you found about your classmates?
Yeah, it's been really great. Kind of everything I expected, and then maybe more. It's such an impressive, diverse group of people.
Everyone has a dream, and some people's dreams take them to extraordinary places. David Simon is one of those people. Tune in every quarter to learn how a 50-something lawyer from the U.S. navigates the ancient world of Oxford College in pursuit of an MBA.
Tom Fox back in with David Simon for another episode of A Yank at Oxford. So, David, first of all, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you, Tom.
So, David, in our first episode, we talked about the start of your journey, but that journey has accelerated a fair amount. So we wanted to get together to kind of bring us up to speed and get some of your thoughts and what your experiences have been in your really, I guess, now first couple of months at Oxford in the MBA program. So could we maybe start out by, if I could ask you about your classmates, what were you expecting, if anything, and what expectations have been met, not met, or what have you found about your classmates?
Yeah, it's been really great. Kind of everything I expected, and then maybe more. It's such an impressive, diverse group of people. We've got, sort of everything in our cohort from, pretty traditional business backgrounds, finance people, bankers, engineers, salespeople, to, there's a bunch of other lawyers. We've got some doctors. We've got a race car aerodynamic engineer. We've got a guy who produces West End theater. I mean, it's really super interesting and really impressive people. Which is what I expected. I mean, really, that's part of the reason I chose this program, is because I fully expected Oxford to draw, a great group. I guess one of the things that's been a little bit of a surprise, maybe not a surprise, I just hadn't really thought about it, is just how the environment is so great, right? As an adult going back to school with a bunch of other adults, who are eager to learn and open and willing to share their experiences and their perspectives in a really honest way, that it's just been really, really awesome. I've enjoyed it even more than I expected.
David, perhaps we should have started with actually bringing our audience up to date. At the end of the first podcast, you were on the cusp of beginning your program. What have you done over the past couple of months, both in person and virtually, to fulfill your degree requirement?
Yeah, so we've had two 1-week sessions. The first one was virtual. It was back in September, and we did the whole thing. It was about a week of pretty close to full-time, classwork and preparation during that week. And then we had a week in person in Oxford in the first week of November. So that was great. It was my first chance to actually be on campus. It was actually the first time I've ever set foot in Oxford, which, Tom, you've told me some stories, and you weren't kidding about what a great place it is. So that was really terrific. We're actually going back again in a couple of weeks. First week of December, we have another in-person module. And we're hoping to go, COVID permitting, we're hoping to be going in person from now on. I do. One other thing in terms of actually meeting requirements of the degree, we've actually had our first assessment, and I'm actually working on it right now. I was up at 3:00 in the morning with Excel formulas running through my head, which I can tell you has never happened to me before in my life. My analytics class, which is pretty much statistics, we've just gotten through, and we're having our very first test. So I've got a project I've got to turn in after Thanksgiving. You can imagine it has not been an easy task for me. My last math class was in, I think, 1986. So it's been challenging, but it's been fun. And I think I'm getting through my assignment. I'm hoping I've done enough to pass. That's kind of where I'm setting the bar for myself.
So, David, we laughed, although perhaps not too much, in our first episode about your upcoming adventures in mathematics, statistics, and analytics. But I was wondering if I could ask, in addition to maybe having to re-energize a muscle you hadn't worked in a long time, what was your experience with your classmates helping you get through what I'm going to say was probably the most difficult class for you?
Yeah, I hope it's going to be the most difficult class. It was our first one. And it really was hard for me. Basic stuff. And I think I speak for a lot of lawyers. We don't really know Excel. We don't live and breathe in Excel the way a lot of business people do. For me, I was like the guy who had my assistant. I'd get an Excel spreadsheet and I'd say, print this on like a really big piece of paper so I can read this small, tiny print. And for anybody who knows anything about Excel, that sort of misses the point entirely. So it's been hard. I've actually really liked it because it's been just using a totally different part of my brain. And the teacher is just maybe the best teacher I've ever had. I mean, he's just outstanding. But to your point, I've really had to rely on my classmates, almost all of whom are more adept at the quant stuff than I am. And they've been super generous and super helpful, and just, basic stuff like how to do things in Excel that everybody apparently in the world besides me knows how to do. I've been really grateful for the support. I hope I can reciprocate in something. Maybe we'll have a business law course or something where I'll have something to offer.
David, I know one of the goals you had in this entire experience was really to help broaden and improve your decision making. I was wondering, maybe go through some of the challenges you thought we faced as lawyers, and I include us both in that, obviously. But what has been some eye-opening or interesting areas for you to see how lawyers and compliance professionals can improve decision making?
Yeah, so it's one of the areas where we've spent a good amount of time in. One of my courses is a leadership fundamentals course, and we spent sort of a unit on decision making, and I thought it was really interesting. I thought there were some kind of, for me at least, revelations about sort of maybe some of the blind spots for lawyers in decision making. I think about sort of the classic kind of lawyer decision making paradigm, right? Where, there's this, usually partner, the lead lawyer, who's, making these decisions based on, intuition and judgment and experience. And it's this sort of true professional, style of making decisions. And, this sort of what we think we get paid to do. It makes sort of what a great lawyer is and does. One of the things I've learned in my coursework is that, the research is pretty clear that kind of decision making tends to produce bad decisions a kind of a higher percentage of the time. They talk about system one decision making, which is sort of that intuitive experience, judgment-based decision, and system two decision making, which is more methodical and process oriented. And learning this stuff sort of had me reflect on kind of how I typically make decisions in my practice, and how my partners and friends make decisions. And I think we really do land in that system one box most of the time. A lot of the reason that goes wrong is cognitive bias, right? I mean, I think a lot of people have sort of heard about cognitive bias, but there are a number of those kinds of biases that I think particularly affect lawyer decision making. Things like confirmation bias, anchoring bias, where you get tied to an early fact that sort of skews how you think about subsequent facts. Salience bias, where you're influenced by a prior case too much. All that sort of stuff can produce just not as good of decisions as I think our clients deserve. And so one of the things we learned about is, the importance of, building systems in place to slow down the process, right? So you use things like checklists, right, to make sure every factor is being considered before you make a judgment call, or, build some process just to kind of force you to reckon with some of those cognitive biases that might affect how you think about something. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, you do this too, Tom. I mean, think about like a self-disclosure question, right? You do an investigation, you're advising a client on whether to self-disclose. I mean, there's all kinds of potential biases there that might produce a bad decision, right? There's like a self-interest, potential, like, oh, if I self-disclose, maybe I'm going to get, more billings and this is going to benefit me personally. There's like anchoring, right? You might find an early fact. You see something in a document that colors the way you see the whole matter. Maybe you're heavily influenced by the last case. It's like, oh, this is just like this last one I did, except to the extent that it's not. And sort of building, I guess the ultimate point is, building some structure around how we make decisions, I think would lead to better decision making. One more thing I want to say about this, and then maybe we can talk about teams. But one of the things that struck me in this decision-making study is the importance of dissent. And that's also something we're not great at as lawyers, is promoting dissent among our teams and really figuring out a way to get honest, objective opinions from other people on the team. So, one of the things I'm going to try to incorporate more is really, encouraging team members to voice dissent, maybe even to create it intentionally. One of the techniques, sort of in the same vein, is they call it a pre-mortem, right? So you start with the assessment that everything went wrong that could possibly go wrong. It's the worst of worst case, and then you sort of think backwards, like, well, okay, what led to that worst of worst case, and it helps you, identify landmines and potential missteps. So I found that whole discussion and all the readings we did in this really fascinating and really relevant to what we do as lawyers.
So now let's maybe move to a broader team approach, or your thoughts on how this type of decision-making process might be utilized in a team. You really articulated very well what I think is a standard law firm approach with senior partner, perhaps a couple of senior partners if it's a very serious matter, junior partners, perhaps senior associates, junior associates, and research clerks or others that may be a part of a team. But how do you get that team not really moving on the same page or towards the same goal? Because I think we do that, but how do you incorporate these various strategies around decision-making in the team decision-making approach?
Yeah, it's another really, to me anyway, a really fascinating and really relevant topic for lawyers and law firms. And we spent a bunch of time studying this as well. So, I think most people would agree, including even most lawyers, that, a really high-performing team produces the best results. I mean, you can obviously do more as a team than you can individually. And I think you're absolutely right the way you described the typical sort of law firm model, right? We sort of just default to this team based on role, based on title, based on, where you fit into the firm hierarchy, without really thinking about, what the team is trying to accomplish and what you need on the team to accomplish that goal. I was thinking about this, like one of the analogies that came to mind. This may not work exactly, but I think about like professional tennis versus professional football, right? Like professional tennis, like Roger Federer has a team, but the whole team is just there to support Roger Federer, right? And Roger Federer is the ultimate, performer. He's got a physio, he's got a coach, he's got all that stuff. I compare that, and that I think that tends to be the way the law firms work, right? It's the senior partner who's the Roger Federer role, and then there's a team to support her or him in that whole process. As opposed to sort of football, where you've got at least 22, maybe a little bbit more if you add special teams and different roles, all of which are critically important to achieving the objective. So I think, one of the things we sort of focused on, one of the things I'm going to focus on is trying to change the law firm model, at least on my matters, from less the Roger Federer and more the Green Bay Packers approach. And I guess part of the way I think about that, I guess first off, is formation of the team, right? We were talking about this before, right? It's just the way it kind of works now is role based. One of the things we learned is that there's some good research on this, that really high performing teams, there are very specific kind of functional roles that are important to high performance. So it's stuff like the creative plant person who's comes up with the what if ideas. You need a person who's an organizer and will set a process and make sure that the process stays on track. You need a person who's sort of the finisher, who's going to bring the thing in under the deadline and make sure people are getting things done. You might have an expert who has subject matter expertise. So there's, the literature talks about 9 different roles that high performing teams have. But and obviously you don't need all of those in every matter, and it's going to vary depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But I think it's really important to think about at the front end what you're trying to accomplish and what you need and who can serve those roles, and to communicate clearly at the front end who's doing what, and maybe even have like a team charter or at least an understanding of you're the glue guy in this team. Your job is to make sure everybody's getting along. And you're the finisher. You are responsible for making sure this brief gets, completed and filed on the day it's due. So I thought that was pretty interesting and something I think we could learn from as lawyers, and we could do better. Another thing on team composition that I thought was interesting is the importance of having like a client expert on the team. So somebody who really understands the client and their business and their objectives and can voice that as the team's working towards its goals. So I thought that was interesting and important. And I guess then the last couple points on this, sorry to ramble on, I get kind of excited about this stuff because it's all sort of new and interesting to me. But it's not just about the formation of the team, but also how the team performs. So again, setting expectations at the front end, communicating them clearly, I think is really important. Checking in, throughout, making sure that the team is, accomplishing what it's set out to accomplish. Also really important. Milestones, making sure you're on track, those kinds of things. And then, the third thing is, maybe bringing in an outside perspective to the team to challenge some of the team's assumptions, maybe looping back to the decision-making point and the cognitive bias issue, right? Having someone who's not absorbed in the team dynamics, who can pop in at certain points and say, here's how you're doing, and maybe point out where you're off track in a way a team, a day-to-day team member can't do it. So that stuff to me was all really fascinating, and I think has real potential application in the way we lawyers sort of do our work.
David, a little bit earlier, you mentioned about the sort of professional and work diversity of your classmates. But I was wondering if I also understand you have geographic diversity from their backgrounds and really from the kind of non-UK, non-Canadian, non-American perspective. Have you had discussions around corruption, perspectives on corruption, or anti-corruption compliance?
Yeah, we have actually. It's interesting how often that has come up in our discussions, particularly people who are, operating businesses in emerging markets. I was struck by how often I heard comments about, one of our courses is sort of a microeconomics, firms and markets course, and we're talking about, market failures and the role of government. And a topic that just keeps coming up, which sort of surprises me actually, is just how corruption in government really impacts business. And it struck me, Tom, with what we do with a lot in our practice, it's sort of struck me that, we may be, it may be a lot more prevalent than we think. And it made me wonder whether, some of the compliance stuff we do is less effective than we think, and maybe a little bit more kabuki theater, where, we're just not maybe sufficiently cognizant of just how corruption plays a daily life role in some jurisdictions. And, it made me think that some of the compliance stuff we do, we might need to be peeling away more layers of the onion than we have been in terms of really what's going on in certain places. And, whether there's a level of just kind of background noise in the environment that gets missed by, particularly by U.S. and Western compliance officers who are only dropping in occasionally.
Before we move to some fun stuff I wanted to ask you about, I want to circle back on the decision making, because you said several things several times about dissent, other voices, different opinions, and why it's so important in individual decision making to have that, in the team decision making approach. But can I maybe extrapolate that out to the conversation around whistleblowers? Because certainly the government, the SEC, has led a charge to garner more whistleblowing for enforcement actions. But I think many people now see a whistleblowing system not simply as a legal requirement under Sarbanes-Oxley, but as a way to engage employees and to bring information that's closer to the ground up to decision makers. And it seemed to me, listening to you, that your experience individually in the team group really could have a broader discussion as well within speak up, raise your hand, reporting, whatever you might choose to call it, in corporations, and that might be a real strategic shift in thinking. Have you thought about any of those concepts?
I hadn't thought about it, but it's a really interesting point, I think. One of the things we talked about quite a bit is something called psychological safe space, which sounds awfully kind of millennial, but it's not designed to be, sort of maybe what it first sounds like. I mean, the idea is creating an environment in a team or in a company or whatever situation you're in, where people really do feel safe voicing their views, especially dissenting views or unpopular views like a whistleblower's view. And we talked a little bit about some techniques to promote that. I think one of the big things is having a leader of that group who listens. Having a leader of that group who can admit her own mistakes or his own mistakes openly, creating an environment where blame is not sort of part of the game. It's always about constantly improving. One of the examples that they used in one of the readings was Pixar, the animated film company, and the I can't remember the guy's name, but the person who was sort of the driver of Pixar said, we start every work on every film saying, this is a bad movie. How can we make it better? And I think that's a really an interesting way to approach things, a good way to approach things. I think it helps make for better decision making, but it also helps. I think it helps promote that culture you're talking about, that speak up culture, where you can intentionally create an environment where people can raise their hand, where they can flag issues. And it's not just saying, we have a speak up culture, but it's demonstrating it through the way you lead the organization.
You've now traveled to Oxford. I've attended Oxford as well. And as great as the academic experience is, that's only part of it. So maybe we could start off with, could you talk to us a little bit about the college system, how it's different than the college system here in the United States, and your personal experience at Keble College?
Yeah, for sure. So, and a lot of people may know this. I know you know this, Tom. I didn't before I started down this path. But Oxford is set up where it's almost like a matrix, right? So you are in your school, and we're in the side business school that's sort of owns our curriculum, but you're also a member of a college, which is really important when you're an undergrad, because a lot of the instruction and what you do comes out of the college. But it's really one of the great things about Oxford is they even we like part-time business old guys, we get admitted, we matriculate at a college, we're a member of the college, and part of it. So and it actually, just give you an example of sort of what I think is kind of the brilliance of the model. We had a breakfast at Keeble, and it's spectacular. I mean, it's spectacular. We're in this dining hall that looks like a scene out of Harry Potter, and chatting with a couple of the fellows and a couple of professors, and one of the like student leaders of the college joined us for breakfast, and I sat with him. He was a PhD engineering student, right? So completely different world from mine. And we had a great conversation about, he's interested in renewable energy. We're talking about, climate change within the context of business. He's looking at, climate change issues from an engineering like a fuel engineering perspective. I didn't really understand a good chunk of what he was talking about, but we were able to sit together in that environment and share ideas and cross-pollinate. And it was really interesting and really, I think stimulated both of us to think differently about things. So that's kind of the whole point of the college system, and it really works great. I actually, I don't know if we talked about this, Tom, before, but I did stay in the dorm, which was an interesting experience for me. It's a graduate student dorm, but it was still a dorm, which was different. Perfectly nice, but pretty dorm-like. Some of my classmates actually were in colleges where they had to share bathrooms. I did not have to do that. But it was fun, and there's a big group of us at Keeble, and we're enjoying the resources there, and enjoying being able to be part of that as well. It's really fun.
One thing I did not get to do, which I still rue, is I was not able to row on the Thames. And I understand you got to do that. Tell us about that.
I did. Yeah, it was great. It was really, it was like one of those bucket list things, right? To have that experience. And it was actually kind of cool because we did it. One of our leadership professors actually organized the event. And so it was designed in part as a team dynamic sort of lesson, as well as being really cool and really fun to be out on the Thames in a large boat. And I know it's not called a boat, whatever the appropriate term is, but it was great. And we, part of the lesson was, he started by saying, when's the last time you tried something you didn't know if you could do, that you weren't good at, that you weren't accomplished at, and, stretching yourself. To which I answered, my analytics class an hour ago would be an example of that. But the other point that he made that sort of resonated with me was, rowing. We were in these 8-person, boats. And he said, rowing isn't about how good you are at rowing. It's how consistently you're rowing with the other people on your team. So you can be really good and have a great, stroke and have it perfect. But if you're not in sync with everybody else in the boat, it's going to be a disaster. And I thought that was pretty interesting and pretty cool. And it was a ton of fun. We actually are forming a little club of putative rowers that we're going to try to get out a few more times during the course of our program. So it was cool. It was really cool.
There's some magical experiences at Oxford. Some of those involve geographic locations. Some of those involve the people, but it seems to me you were able to wed the people and the location with a truly magical experience. Could you tell us about your dinner?
Yeah, we had a formal dinner at Balliol College, which is one of the oldest colleges at Oxford. I think I can't remember the age of the dining hall, but really, really old, let's say. And it was, it's spectacular. I mean, it's sort of everything you would picture in terms of an Oxford college. And we had a formal dinner, and it was beautiful and inspiring. And I think we're going to be doing this on every in-person cohort. We're trying to organize a dinner at a different college, which is really pretty special. And just an amazing environment to be in. Really, really great.
So, David, we're nearing the end of this podcast, but I was wondering if you might give our listeners a little teaser of what you're going to be doing in Experience, maybe over the next quarter before we get back together for another pod.
Yeah, so we're in a pretty intensive time right now. So we have a session in December, a session in January, a session in February, and a session in March. So this next session, we're finishing Leadership Fundamentals, and we're finishing Firms and Markets are our two courses. And I should know this, but I don't remember what we've got coming up on deck. But we usually have two modules going at once. So sometime in the first quarter, I think it'll be a great time to report back, and I can tell you if I've passed my analytics assessment, or if you don't hear another podcast, it's probably because I've been sent home for failing.
Well, somehow I don't think that's going to happen, David, but I look forward to hearing more about your journey as we follow you as a Yank in Oxford.
Thanks, Tom. I enjoyed talking to you again.
This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A Yank at Oxford. We've got a couple of new podcast series running on the Compliance Podcast Network I wanted to talk to you about. The first one is Once Upon a Trading Law, the History of Insider Trading, where Professor Karen Woody interviews students in her insider trading class to talk about the history of this law. If you're interested in this topic, it's a great one and a really unique perspective that Karen and her students bring. Also, Gwen Hassan has started a new podcast, Hidden Traffic, which talks about human trafficking and modern slavery, and Gwen's journey and advocate in the fight against both of these international scourges. And finally, while not a new podcast series, Mikhail Ryder-Gordon is back with season 2 in the Wirecard saga. Mikhail's podcast has become one of the go-to resources literally across the globe for the Wirecard saga. So I hope you will check out these podcasts all on the Compliance Podcast Network. Finally, if you've ever wanted to start a podcast or have an idea for a podcast, please give me a call. I'd love to visit with you and see if I can get you on the Compliance Podcast Network. A Yank in Oxford is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.